afternoon, everyone. Thank you for calling in or being here in person today. As I know pretty much everyone here, I'm Brianne Lowe. I'm the State Easement Program Specialist, and I appreciate everyone taking the time out of their day to come in and learn a little bit more about the Agriculture Conservation Easement Program and what it has to offer this year. Before we get started, I thought I would let Jane Hardesty, our State Conservationist, kick it off with her thoughts for the day.
Well, thank you. Good to see those here, and I know there's someone on the phone here.
There's a couple of participants.
Okay, great, and we'll do introductions here in just a little bit. Thank you all for taking some time. I know everybody's extremely busy. We're finding out, as you can imagine, with our new Farm Bill, we keep getting little bits and pieces each month, a little bit more to learn about what the rules and the regulations are. And the one that we've been waiting on is the one we want to talk about this afternoon. And I'm so pleased that you took time because we want to share some information, but more than anything, we need your help. We need your help in understanding what the program is and the opportunities that it has, and to also help us get the word out. So the one exciting piece about this last new Farm Bill is that they have streamlined some programs. Now, when you look at it, you can say, well, I don't know that it's streamlined or not, but I can tell you internally, from administrative, programming, contracting, easement, it is streamlined for us. And I think when the landowner goes through the process, that they'll find out that it is a lot easier. So basically what Congress allowed us to do is they allowed us to take our 3 easement programs from the last Farm Bill, which was Wetland Reserve, Grassland Reserve, and what was called the Farm and Rangeland Protection Program. And so we've taken those 3, and we've now just merged them into one easement program, and that's what we have, and it's called the Agriculture Conservation Easement Program. Now, with that being said, when you look at it, it still has 2 major components, which kind of still makes sense. One is still dealing with trying to reserve and restore and protect our wetlands, and the other component is taking a look at our agricultural land, which not only includes all cropland, but what's exciting about this one, it includes our pasture and our grassland. So we kind of got the 2 components, the wetland side of the issue and then the other cropland and so forth. So we've had a pretty good history here in Indiana in that with our easement programs, we've been able to currently protect about 71,000 acres in some kind of an easement out of these 3 programs in the past. Some of the entities that we have worked with on the easements that we're going to talk about today is TNC, Niches, Sycamore Land Trust, the Little Rivers Wetland, no, they're not called wild. The Little Rivers Wetland folks, because they're sitting here with us today that we've worked a lot with. Friends of the Lost Conservation Association, and then there's been a few others too. So, why are we kind of concerned about this? Well, I don't really have exact figures that I feel comfortable in sharing, but we know that we are losing too many acres of prime farmland here in Indiana. And when you kind of compare us, even though we may be the smallest state west of the Appalachia, when you look at our total land base, we rank second in the nation of having a lot of prime farmland based on our total land mass. So that tells us that we've got some pretty good land here in Indiana that we want to make sure is being used to the very best. And having programs like this, it really gives landowners some options if they really want to somehow take some of their land and really protect it and keep it as it is. As you know, with the way that land goes, we've got absentee owners, we've got a lot of tenants, we've got a history of family members that has their names on the deeds, and when the grandparents and the mom and dads pass on, and the kids are expected to do something with the land, and there's some pretty major decisions that probably aren't being made that could, and we think these programs might really be something that some of these families would be interested in, to try to get their land into easements like this that really protects if they want to deal with the wetlands or if they want to deal with like their ag land. So we feel like that there's some real advantages of this program, and that's why we want to kind of have an open discussion with you all here today. You know, we are, as an agency, we not only provide technical assistance with these landowners, but we also become a part of their operations in helping know what they want to do with their land. And you can see a lot of them concerned long-term about, I put the money into this wetland and I want to make sure it stays that way, or I farmed this ground all my life and I want to leave it in this, and I don't want to see houses built, I don't want to see encroachments come on, so what's my options? And I think these programs are something that can probably help with that. Of course, we're concerned when it comes to agriculture, we got a lot of food to really continue to produce out there for the future needs. And also, the other thing that I'm really anxious to talk with DNR particularly, and like the nature preserves and state parks, the state property, and a little bit of the U.S. forest land too here in the state is that it'd be great if working with those adjacent landowners to be able to put some of their land into easements like this that not only protects their land, but it provides even more protection and support to those state properties. And so we just see a lot of advantages of this. And these programs, particularly the farm and ranch land and the grassland, we've not had a lot of participation in the past because some of the rules just weren't the easiest, but now we've got some changes that Brianne's going to share with you. But also, in doing this, it's going to take, two of us in dealing with the easement. We need another entity to come forward and help with the easement. So we've not had a lot of interest in the past because we're talking about some cash. And, a lot of the groups are not overflowing in budgets unless something out there that I don't know about. So I think we've got some opportunities that the program's a little differently that might be of interest to our land trust groups, particularly DNR. And Mike, of course, you sitting here, I think Purdue promotes things like this and concepts that we could really use the help from an extension standpoint to help get the word out. So with that, Brianne, that kind of sets the stage as to how we come to this point. In Indiana, we're big on partners, and the best way to get the word out is for you all to help us and be a part of it. So we've got what information we have. There may be more to come, but this is our beginning point that we feel pretty confident that we've got a lot of good information to really get this program up and started. Our new year starts October 1. So we'll be starting all over again with a whole new allocation for this program, and we really like to hit the road running with this next month. So with that, Brianne, I'll let you get more into detail since you are the expert in this program.
Yep, certainly. Well, thank you, Jane, for that introduction. I think that really summarizes why we all are here today. As you can see, it is all entities or groups that we invited. We really wanted to focus on that partnership today. So with that, I think it's important because we do have a couple who have called in online to take some time to go around the room and over the phone and everyone introduce who they are, who they work for, and why you have an interest in easements, both WRD and particularly the ALE Ag Lands program. So with that, can you open the line so that our callers can introduce themselves?
Lines are open.
Anybody out there?
This is Nick Heinzelman with DNR. I have a high interest in easements because we do use easements quite often in our strategic acquisition of land, both buying easements and also working with NRCS and land trusts on land that currently has WRP and other types of easements on them.
Thank you, Nick.
Hi, I'll jump in.
John out there?
Hi, this is John Lawrence with Sycamore Land Trust down in Bloomington. This is important to us because, we're in the business of acquiring land for preservation in southern Indiana. It's a, great potential for funding source, whether it's, working with a landowner for them to get an easement, we buy the remainder, or perhaps we acquire property and are able to do an easement later on.
Great. Thank you for calling in today.
Hi, this is Sean Gamble. I'm a grant specialist with the Nature Conservancy, and I support the Indiana field office. So I just wanted to get caught up on the new programs through the 2014 Farm Bill so that I could better assist them.
Thank you for calling in, Sean. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and go around the room. Start on. Please try to talk into the little mic I passed around so everyone can hear you.
Hi, I'm Jill Reinhart. I'm an assistant state conservationist. I focus on special projects here at our state office, so I look for opportunities to kind of match up our partners with these programs as well as other programs and help get lots of things working together in different areas of the state.
Good afternoon. My name is Jordan Sager. I work with our Division of Soil Conservation within the State Department of Agriculture. Interested in easements because we work within the tech teams within the Conservation Partnership. Definitely interested in this kind of new farmland preservation easement because of the reasons Shane mentioned earlier.
Hi, I'm Carrie Lindgren. I'm the Easement Acquisition Specialist here at NRCS, and I would be involved with the ALE, the review of documents, title work, any documentation produced. I'd be reviewing before it closes. Thanks.
I am Amy Silva. I'm the Executive Director for the Little River Wetlands Project, and we have worked in the past with NRCS in some of the conservation easement programs. I'm fairly new to the organization, so this is additional information and learning for me.
Betsy Ann Koyak, Little River Wetlands Project, and I'm definitely interested in hearing how the new requirements and changes can help us move conservation for our watershed.
Tom Laycock with the Indiana Division of Natural Resources. I'm with the Land Acquisition Division, so we are almost on a daily basis involved in acquiring properties and doing the same type of protections that we were earlier talking about.
Mike Schutz, Assistant Director of Extension for Agriculture and Natural Resources, and obviously very interested in how Indiana and our Purdue Cooperative Extension Program offices can be involved in helping people understand the easements and the programs, but also we have a role in natural resources that fits in very well.
All right. Well, thank you to everyone for taking, again, your time out of your day. We're going to go ahead and get started with the meat of the presentation. I'm going to go through, just to give you an overview, where we are with easements. Jane touched on that, just to let you know what we've accomplished thus far, touch on the WRE program, because many of you have worked with us in that respect, and then really dive into the meat of the Ag Land Easement Program. I will say we have not had the Ag Land Easement or the former FRPP in the state before, so a lot of what I'm going to give you is pretty high-cut stuff, just the general overview of the program. If we get into some really detailed, meaty specifics, we're going to write down your questions and get back to you on that, because having not run through one, sometimes you don't know what questions are going to come up. So hopefully we'll see where this goes. But today we've had almost 20 years of conservation easements through these USDA programs here in Indiana. So it's become a legacy, really, at this point in time. Most of you are familiar with the Indiana Wetland Reserve Program. We've worked with you on that capacity. You're still purchasing those or enrolling in that similar program, so you're familiar with that. As Jane said, we have the Grassland Reserve Program. This is one of our former working lands programs to maintain grazing systems on different properties. The Healthy Forest Reserve Program, this is one of our smaller programs that has some unique benefits because it does offer the landowners some safe harbor agreements with timber management, so it is still a working lands program. The idea that people will be able to harvest trees on an area at the same time protecting peony species such as the Indiana bat or the copper-belly water snake. Right now, this project area only exists up in the northeast part of the state in that copper. So this is where those numbers at 71,000, the breakdown as it is. As you can see, up to date, the Wetland Reserve Program has made up the bulk of our acres, followed closely by the Floodplain Easement Program. That program is actually not a Farm Bill program. It's an emergency watershed protection program that operates very similarly to the WRP. Grassland Reserve Program, we do have about 885 acres across the state, and Healthy Forest Reserve is about 1,200. And this is the distribution that we have in Indiana. So you can see, especially since the bulk of it is WRP, that there are some trends as to where these properties are located. Obviously, along the Wabash River, the Kankakee Marsh area, some of the pothole region up in the northeast, and down in our HRI area in the Muscatatuck. So what are some benefits that we're seeing from these easements? Of course, with these production easements that we do have, this is really stabilizing the availability of productive ground, making sure that in the case of GRP, those grazing land uses are not lost within Indiana, or as we move forward, control cropping losses are not there. This also is an opportunity to revitalize our natural resources, create economic viability within the state, and an important thing that we hear from a lot of our participants, particularly in GRP, is that family legacy. And as we get into the meat of ALE, there is a component of that family legacy that comes with it. These also expand the protection beyond the public land. 70% of the lands in the U.S. are in private ownership. So here's an opportunity to expand any of those protections that we already have in public land, in nature preserves and things like that, to ground that's owned by a private individual. This is also that permanent protection, as we've said over and over again, permanent protection of farmland, permanent protection of habitat, soil and water benefits that come with that, and again, buffers to that existing land. So that's where we've been, and so this is where we're heading. And this is the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program that Jane mentioned. This is the new rebranding of those easement programs we had in the past. This took the WRP, the GRP, the FRPP, and rolled them together. It created two tracks within that program, the Wetland Reserve and the Ag Land Easements, and that's what we're going to break down here today. So the Wetland Reserve Easements, and many of you have probably even started working with us, as we did have a sign-up this year, it operates very similar to WRP, very similar deed, similar rules and regulations. In this instance, it's a deed that is held by the United States government, so we are the holders of that easement. It is a fully funded restoration, so we are committed to still paying 100% for the restoration. In instances where maybe it's a shorter duration, such as the 30-year easement, we'll pay up to 75%. A couple of the changes, and some that we're very excited about, is the ownership requirement has dropped. In the past Farm Bill, it was a 7-year ownership rate. With the new Farm Bill, it's a 24-month or 2-year ownership rate, and there is still the availability of ownership waivers. So in some instances, if the ownership is less than that 2 years, we can give consideration to whether or not it can still enroll in the program. Another big positive change that we have seen is the ability to enroll CRP trees. With WRP, those had to be excluded from the program, and that was problematic, especially in some of our floodplain systems. With the new program, we can give consideration to those trees and offer a waiver for their enrollment. There are no 10-year restoration cost share agreements. Most people didn't even know that option existed. It wasn't a very common one taken, and all of ours in Indiana had actually expired last year, so we haven't used it in over 10 years. So that is actually no longer part of the program. A couple of the big changes that do affect the enrollment process is access to the easement has to be proven before it can be accepted for enrollment. This is a little bit different than what we did in the past. In the past, we needed to know that we could get to that easement area, particularly if it was not immediately adjacent to a public road, but we would work with the landowner over the course of the easement processing time frame to get that access recorded. We need to know up front now that that access is recorded, it's in a legal document so that they can transfer that access right to us. The reason this has become an issue is nationwide access has become an easement problem. We're fortunate here in Indiana that that hasn't been the case for us, that we can still access, as far as I know, all of our easements, but because of that nationwide problem, this is now a programmatic requirement. In addition, all individuals and entities that do apply for WRE have to have their DUNS, AGI, and wetland compliance eligibility in place at the time of the application. We will continue to use the GARC system, for those of you who are familiar with that, those geographic area rate caps that show, we'll get into those here in a second, but they'll show you, exactly what you're going to get up front. So that way we're still dealing with that certainty factor that we can tell an applicant, a landowner, that this is how much your land is worth under this easement. So WRE, the same eligibility requirements that we've had in the past as far as the land, privately owned. Still, as we've done a long time ago, the DNR did have ability to apply. That is still no longer the case, but it is possible to transfer that still after the easement is in place. The land does have to be restorable. It has to be of sufficient size, so we have maintained our 15-acre minimum on this. It also has to meet the various criteria you see there at the bottom of the screen. Basically saying this was a farmland, it was very wet, it was formerly a wetland, now let's restore it. These are the GARC rates. All of you have probably seen this table. This was last year's GARC rates, just to give you an idea of what they were. We are currently evaluating the 2015 GARC rates, and there is going to be a slight change in the process. In the central region of the state, we're actually going to be looking at appraisals if we should get any there. And the reason is that we have had historically very low interest in this part of the state. And to do our geographic rate caps where we can just set a rate for those easements, we have to do what's called an area-wide market analysis. With that market analysis, that costs money for each region we evaluate. And due to reductions in budget nationwide, we want to make sure that we're focusing that effort on those areas where we have the most enrollment rate. If we do get one or two applications in the appraisal area, we still will not hit that market analysis cost with that appraisal cost. So we're really, unless we suddenly see a huge jump in interest in WRP in that appraisal area, it just makes more sense to do appraisals there. So this year we did have our first WRE sign-up. It was extremely successful. We had 11 applications that we were funded for 865 acres. So we were very pleased, given that this was a late rollout for the program with the delay in the Farm Bill, to see so much interest in such a short time frame. So with that, we're going to kind of switch gears. I guess I'll go ahead and say, does anyone have any questions about the new WRE program before we continue on to the meat of the presentation? Anyone online have any questions?
And if you would like to ask a question, you can press *1 on your phone, and that will put you into the question queue. We did not receive any written questions so far.
Okay.
I've got a question on that ownership. The pretty significant change from 7 years to 24 months. It's got to be good for the land trust groups. What motivated that?
Well, I think that the issue more is what motivated the 7 years. Several at the last Farm Bill, there was some concern with basically WRP speculation in the past. People would buy the land and immediately flip it over, so you were kind of getting this double whammy with it. So the thought was that 7 years would prevent that. Well, what it did also is preclude groups such as Trust and TNC from enrolling as well, and some of our landowners. I mean, owning land for 7 years, especially, in the Midwest, that's a very long period of time. So there was that acknowledgement, I think, with all the public policy that needed to be shortened, but also keep in mind that we didn't want people basically just flipping that land.
Do you foresee that change being significant on the new number of contracts and acres?
We have already seen an increase in demand. A lot of those 11 applications this year were people who had been trying to get to that 7-year point, and now we're able to get in. So, yeah, that's a huge huge benefit. We're very happy about that. All right. With that, we'll move into the fun stuff now. So ag land easements. So this is really a chance to totally change our frame of mind and how easements work. As I said, I know many of you have worked with us with WRE, and this program does operate quite differently. It does combine, as we stated before, the former FRPP and GRP. It provides one of these two benefits you see up here, protecting that agricultural use, and something that wasn't available in FRPP but is now is protecting those grazing uses. That's where the GRP component came in. GRP used to be run as a joint program between FSA and NRCS. FSA now handles entirely on its own the rental component of GRP, and the easement component of GRP has been rolled into these ag land easements. So here's to outline those differences that are occurring with the program. The biggest one to keep in mind is that ag land easements are the entity-held deed. The United States government does not hold the ag land deed in these instances. Instead, the U.S. and the entity will enter into a cooperative agreement for the purchase of these easements. So that is a big difference between the two. The entity will be in a purchase agreement with the landowner, unlike the WRE program where we enter that purchase agreement. There is no restoration cost share on the FRPP or the ALE side of it. There was none for FRPP either. There is opportunities down the line if there are resource concerns on the property for the participant to enroll in other programs such as EQIP. But for the ALE component of it, there is no restoration cost share. The entity is ultimately responsible for the monitoring of the easement. NRCS does do a checkup on that about once every 5 years, but we are reliant on annual reports from the entity on the status of that easement. And all ALE easements are forever.
The entity, is that us out here?
That would be you guys.
Okay, and so how does that work for funding? I mean, is there, like WRP, you get paid X amount of dollars per acre?
We're going to get into a funding string, so we'll come up on that way, because it's a different process together, so we'll show you. So just to give you an idea of what the entity who's coming to the table needs to have, agricultural conservation in its mission. In addition, something that needs to be considered with that is an existence of ag land easements. We know that's not the case for many of our entities in Indiana, and in talking with our national program manager, something that we can do is work with you to see if existing conservation easements you hold, perhaps the language in those would mesh well with an ag land easement to fill this requirement of existing ag land easements. Especially that works particularly well with the grassland side of it, because we know a lot of our partnering land trusts do have prairie easements or prairie preserves out there. Sure you guys can see. Thought I had that shut off. So that's a little bit different, and it's not going to say that's going to preclude, if you have never held an ag land easement before, that doesn't preclude you for participation in the program. It means we're going to have to look at what your organization has done in the past to see how we can make that work with the program or how that fits well within this requirement. Another option that's been used in other states is having the entity partner with another entity that has held ag land easements in the past. So that way the first couple that are going through the program have sort of this joint effort to get that rolling on the ground. It's just a requirement that makes sure that the easement or the entity we're entering into this easement agreement with has the skill set and the personnel in place to manage the easement as it needs to be. Again, with all this and what we've said over and over again is if you're going to have these ag land easements and you've already got them in place, you're going to have the ability to hold or purchase land or hold the title at least. Having the support place to manage the easement, that is something key. So this doesn't just end when the easement closes. It is the ability, as I said before, you have to monitor these over time and make sure that they are being maintained. This is a forever easement. You also need to have funds in place for the due diligence of the acquisition. The money we're going to be talking about here in the next couple screens is to purchase the easement itself, but it is going to be the requirement of the entity to provide information regarding the appraisal, the survey of the easement, and the title work as well. So this is different to because in the case of WRE, NRCS is handling these components. The biggest issue that we need to have up front, too, is to be aware that you must have properties in place or interest in properties to apply. So what does this mean? It means that you are already working on the ground with private landowners who have expressed interest in having an ag land easement. You have a written offer with them. That written offer can be pending enrollment in the ALE program, but you have to come to with your application in place with these pending offers.
Can I ask a question of just qualifications? Is this only grassland, pasture land?
No, ALE can also be for croplands. So it's got both. Yeah. Both crop production or grassland production.
And like a Pheasants Forever or a Ducks Unlimited entity like that, is that kind of what we're talking about?
They could. That could be a potential easement holder. Other states, what we've seen is the state departments of ag are holders of that as well. Local governments or departments have held these deeds as well. They're having specific conservation groups, particularly on the east and west coast, that have specific ag land interests, especially with all the development that is going on those coastal regions. They are the ones that hold these deeds. So it hasn't been used very much in the Midwest yet, but we're hoping, as we've seen these rapid rates of development, to generate some more interest from the groups we have here.
And that entity then just typically will rent out that land?
It is not an outright purchase. So the landowner will still own the land. Basically, it's saying it's going to put a document or it's going to put a restriction on the deed to that land that says it can never be converted to anything other than an agricultural use.
Bree?
Mm-hmm.
Does it, for a conservation easement that we held, it started off, the landowner had farm ground, and then he decided to restore it. Is there something in the deed that said it can go back to fallow ground, or does it always have to be farmed, or how does that work?
There is nothing in the deed that makes it a requirement that it is farmed. It just you cannot restrict them from ever going back to farming. So if we know that there's individuals who do buy land, they want to live out in the rural country, they may let some of the crop ground go fallow. If the next owner purchases it and wants to put it back in crop ground, there is no way to restrict that. So if the one individual did go in and plant prairie grasses, it could be reverted back to crop ground with the next landowner. So that's how that works. There is no requirement that it be farmed.
It's just a restriction.
Yes, basically.
So to answer your question, that's what American Farmland Trust was founded on, with farmland in particular, and a lot of these to begin with, and some of this is very challenge that AFG ran into, trying to grow audit that from time to time. Does try to convert. Got the litigation against them trying to defend the use of them.
I appreciate the addition of that, because there are different things that have to be thought of. This doesn't just end at the closing of the easement. So there are multiple enrollment options. We're going to focus really on the regular ALE today. The grasslands of special significance, the rules for that designation haven't come out. They had some very general rules in 2014, but given this is a new program, they've been writing the regulations over the course of the last couple months, and hopefully we'll release these by the end of the year or early in calendar year 2015. So I don't want to dive too much into what a grassland of special significance is, because if those rules change in the next couple weeks, it'll change that dynamic. But they follow pretty similar rules. So for the land to be eligible, it has to be privately owned agricultural or ranch land, has to have prime, unique, or productive soils on that land, contain historical or archaeological resources, the enrollment of which would protect the grazing uses of that land, or the protection which will further state or local policy consistent with what an ag conservation easement would get. Still pretty broad. So one of the reasons that we are so interested in this in Indiana are these facts that we have here before you. And this is based on our natural resources inventory. So the total prime farmland in Indiana back in 2007 was 12.8 million acres. By 2010, it was down to 12.6 million, so a loss of 200,000 acres of prime farmland soil areas. Of those, the crop prime farmland went from 10.7 million down to 10.6 million, or 50,000 acres of prime crop farmland lost in 3 years' time. What we do know is we don't have enough microphones, unfortunately, to go around, so we'll try to make sure the one microphone gets passed around the room more as people speak. Thank you. The crop prime farmland, what we do know of all cropland, whether it's prime or marginal, 40% of that loss is to development. That's a lot. And so that is really why we have this resurgence of need for these ALE programs here in Indiana.
Could I make a comment? I just came from the State House, and they're having a local government committee, and they're talking about annexation. And you just gave my presentation, just right there. I mean, you just summed it up perfectly. My comments were annexation, if not done right, opens up the possibility of converting more land at even a faster rate than this. So it's slowed down in the last 5 years because the economy and home building and all that sort of stuff has slowed down. But we expect as the economy picks up that there's going to be a lot more development pressure. And I think I used NRCS figures to say that cropland in Indiana, 60% of it is considered prime. So that's, and 5.3% of the nation's prime cropland is in Indiana. So if you lose an acre of prime land in Indiana, you lose it from the national resource base.
Absolutely. That's why this is such a critical situation. Mike, since you weren't here during introductions, can you, for our online webinar folks, go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'm sorry, I just came in the room. My name is Michael Bays, and I'm the Midwest Director for the American Farmland Trust. Sorry I'm late.
Oh, no, that's okay. I just appreciate it. You want to make sure they know whose voice they're hearing over the speaker there. As stated earlier, one of the things that is critical with this is it's not the landowner applying for ALE. So we have had participants come into our field offices and express an interest. They want to protect their farm grounds for the very reasons we've all talked about today, but it is not the landowner who applies for this program. And actually, we have some materials up here in the front I welcome you to take a look at later today, but one of the materials I have up there is the program application. It's different than any of our other program applications because it's going to be the entity that applies for the program, and then there are actually attachments to that application that apply to these pending offers to the eligible landowners. So once you've worked with the landowner and they have agreed, yes, we want this ag land easement, then you can enter into a written purchase agreement with them saying, okay, we're going to pursue this pending enrollment in the ag land easement program. But we need to see that that written agreement is in place. And when it gets to that point, we can work with you on the language of that as it goes. So this is the part everyone really wants to know. Let me turn down the lights in here so the folks here can see it a little better. Wait, that clarifies a little more. Is that valuation? So how are we going to evaluate these easements? Who pays for what in this process? So the federal cost share, it's a federal cost share and eligible entity match. So for regular ACEP, the federal share provided by NRCS cannot exceed 50% of the easement appraised value. This is a little bit more streamlined than it was with FRPP. Having not worked with FRPP, I can't say exactly for sure, but I can tell you enough people have told me that math was very convoluted. So this makes it pretty clear-cut. It's not going to exceed 50%. This is an appraisal system. We have very specific appraisal appraisal requirements that we will provide eligible entities if they are interested, and it is available online as well, but we will not pay more than that 50%. The eligible entity must provide at least that equal share equivalent to the NRCS. Now, some of that can be also through a landowner donation. This is confusing, I know. We're going to get to a table to hopefully clarify that some. When you get to the grasslands of special significance, if you do see these available, NRCS can provide up to 75% of that same value, with the entity making up the bulk of the rest. So this table, I think, helps clarify. So that language is all the policy language, and it gets hard. But when you do the math itself, this is what happens. So we're just going to focus on these general ALEs up at the top in the standard option. And assume that ag land easement is about $100,000. The NRCS contribution in that situation cannot exceed the $50,000 mark. That's half of it. So at no point in time is our contribution going to go over that. In a standard situation, the entity is going to provide a match of that $50,000 to make up that $100,000 easement value. In some options, there's also the ability for the entity to provide or to work with the landowner for the landowner to provide a donation. So NRCS, again, is paying $50,000. The entity has to pay at least a minimum of $25,000 of their own cash in the pot, and then the landowner can donate essentially that last $25,000. So that's where there's a little bit of leeway in not having to bring the full 50% to the table, but the entity contribution in that standard option needs to be at least half of what NRCS contributes. For projects of special significance, which we'll talk a little bit about what that means here in a moment, there's even a little bit more leeway. In this case, there's actually a waiver form where the entity can request a waiver to that minimum 50% of NRCS contribution match. And in that instance, the minimum would then allow them to contribute $12,500 in their own cash, with the landowner then donating $37,500. So that, I know that math is different and different options there, but there are some ways that an entity that maybe doesn't have that full 50% can still come to the table. It shouldn't be necessarily something that precludes them, because it is a big dollar amount. With these ones here, the special significance projects, there is a waiver, like I said. And last year, some of the things that were included on that waiver as possible special significance situations was that historic component. We talked about family legacy and the value that has to the easements and has to our participants, that they have been farming that ground, they don't want it to go to development. One of the qualifications under these special significance projects was being able to provide documentation that a farm's been in a family for 100 years. Now, I know I've driven around the countryside and see lots of farms proudly displaying their historic farmland signs out front. That is exactly what this is referring to. Other situations are, an exceptional amount of prime farmland, other archaeological things, options out there. So there are ways to qualify for that project of special significance, and then the waiver process is how we would go through that. So, again, I just gave you what some of the examples of the waiver options were for 2015. There are going to be some minor changes, I believe, in 2015, so I don't want to dive too much into how that policy works, whether it's going to be something we can approve here in Indiana versus at a national level. But those, again, we're waiting on those final rules to come out in December. But I wanted to give you an idea of what those special significance waivers, are counted as. Something else that is required with all of these ag land easements is an ag land easement plan. It is very basic. It's going to describe the activities that are going to occur on that land to promote the long-term viability of the farm. It's also going to have a farm management system with a baseline inventory. What's going on out there now, so that we know exactly where we're starting. It has to establish a limit on the impervious surfaces or the concrete pads, buildings, things, roads such as that. on the site. We don't want to see it, again, converted to a bunch of concrete pads or houses, or, suddenly 5 members of the family have decided to build their own lots out there. This is really to limit that. It also needs to establish the USDA ingress-egress on the property so that we can do our periodic checks that I mentioned earlier. It also can cross-reference a conservation component plan. And what is that? So this would be where the entities could really take a role in how that farm is managed. So with a grassland management plan, something similar to GRP, you have the opportunity as the entity to work with those landowners on developing the grazing system that you want out there. The rotational grazing, the grazing heights, all those can be tied within this plan that will ultimately be tied with that deed. Same with the conservation plan. If there is HEL or wetland issues on site, we are going to require that there is a conservation plan to address those resource concerns with it, but you can go beyond that as an entity. You can require that a certain farming practice, conservation cropping system be used as part of this deed. So, the minimum is making sure things such as highly erodible land are addressed. There is this availability to really have an impact on what kind of conservation farming is going on these properties. Also, if there is a lot of forest land on the easement, you need that forest management plan. Again, it's a working land. We want to make sure that people are able to harvest that forest if they so choose, but we need that plan in place. And you don't have to go this alone. In some instances, you may have the staffing in place to make these plans yourself. They do need to meet NRCS standards and specs, but that is an option for you to do, or you can, as part of the cooperative agreement, ask NRCS to assist you with these. So again, it's really this opportunity to define what the conservation will be on this easement, so choose that route.
Can I just question there? Would requiring conservation cropping, could that be approved as one of those special significance factors you're talking about?
I don't know. That's a great question. I think where we're going to see that play into effect would be more in the ranking system. So we're ultimately, and we'll talk about this later, going to have to develop a ranking system for the applications. We're going to keep our fingers crossed we get so many of these that we're going to need to rank them and put them in a priority order. And so in that instance, having something that says you're going to have a requirement that they use a conservation cropping system could give that parcel of land a higher ranking. And actually, you lead right well into the next slide. So what are these next steps that we have? So I've really just given you that really high level what these ALE plans are, and what the program's going to look like. So we really are, over the next couple months, going to be continuing to push out information on this because we do know how important these are. So as we prepare for our next sign-up, we are going to be working on developing a state plan. We had some state plans for FRPP in the past, but because there was such low interest, we really never had the opportunity to develop a ranking plan. And so we're going to be calling on those interested entities in our state tech committee to help us develop that ranking plan over time. What I encourage you to do as the entities is take a chance to review the available materials that are out there. Because this is a complicated program, there are a lot of different legal documents that are out there that you're going to see. I think it's very valuable to see those up front, and we have made sure that these are available on the website. And I've also got copies of everything you see here up here in the front. A couple things to really focus on are what the cooperative deed or cooperative agreement with NRCS. It really outlines exactly what is expected of the entity and what is expected of NRCS. It's a pretty lengthy document. It's about 60 pages. So I did print out about 5 copies. However, I can get more copies if those run out, but I didn't want to print 15 out and then have not all of them taken. My printer was already yelling at me with the 5 that I printed. Also, now that you've got some of the background, determine how this fits in with your entity in and of itself. Because there are options. Even if you have had more of a nature preserve type focus within your entity, this is a chance to control what's going on the boundaries of your easements or of your actual properties itself. And if interested in ALE, this is the chance and this is the time as we get ready for this next sign-up to start promoting it in those regions that you are interested in. I encourage you to work with us closely so that we can all make sure we're on the same page, but if you have, adjacent landowners that you think might be interested in this and it's an opportunity to provide that protection that you're looking for, this is the time to start contacting them, because when the sign-up comes, you're already going to want to have that agreement in place with them. And please, as we know, we're all new to this here in Indiana, so let's work with this early on, make sure that we're all, again, on the same page. We can discuss what the expectations of either group can be, what can be allowed, what can't be allowed on these easements, make sure that what you want to see as far as the conservation plan, will work with NRCS standards and specifications to try to make sure that as we get these enrolled, that it's a smooth process. Again, there are those worksheets I showed you earlier are related to some of the legal documents that come with this, but there are also some other fact sheets online that you can use when you're talking with the participants. Also, it pertains to WRE as well, and anything that you might deal with that as well. Some specifics, too, for your entity. Those of you who have worked with us have already done these steps, but just in case you haven't, getting your DUNS number and your SAMS number, very important these days. Also establishing just the overall eligibility, working with the Farm Service Agency, getting the track numbers if you're looking at a WRE easement, or just making sure that you are an eligible entity with them as well. So with that, I would like to open up the lines and also open it up for questions here. I crammed a lot of information at you real fast.
I have two questions. The first one, did you say that NRCS will draft the deed, or is that going to be our responsibility as an entity?
That is actually the entity can draft the deed. We have sample deeds, and there was one available last year. I wasn't able to pull one up for today. So there are sample deeds out there. NRCS will have to review it, and that's what Terry's rule plays with that. And also, they are reviewed at a national level as well.
And then my second question is, if they enroll into the ALE, will that further prevent them from going into any other, like, CRP programs later on, or does it prohibit them for any other conservation programs?
No, not necessarily. I would have to look at the regulations for CRP, but I know, for instance, EQIP is still an option for ALE.
That gets into that rental, double dipping.
Yeah, it would be the rental issue with CRP. But for ALE, it is not considered double dipping for the use of EQIP for conservation systems.
And I'm going to open up the lines for our participants online.
Can I ask a question of how property taxes are affected with either easement program?
Yes. I'm going to specifically speak from the WRE side of it. With property taxes, because we're the federal government, we have no influence over those and try not to dabble in that. So it's not the federal government imposing those. What we have seen with WRE is people taking advantage of programs such as classified habitat or classified forest, which then offers at the state level the ability to get tax breaks and reassess land values. So, we would encourage our landowners the same if they would go into an ag land easement to work with their.
Could I say something about that? This is John Lawrence.
Yes.
Yeah, there is a state code. I could get you the site if you want it. Says that county assessors are supposed to take the presence of the conservation easement into account when assessing a property. So now I think a lot of times really the best way for someone to get a property tax break is to enroll in classified forest. But, if for some reason the land was really developable and you put an easement on there that knocks down that value, it should be not assessed at a rate that would reflect the development. That's certainly something the landowner would have to go, wave the code under the nose of the assessor, and they probably will have no idea what you're talking about, but it is there. So I hope
it
that's
is something, though, that as an agency we do put back on the landowner. So as you said, they'll be responsible for taking the deed in to address that.
Can I jump in with a couple questions, please?
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Okay. Number one, on WRE, if I remember right, tell me if I'm wrong, under WRP, was there like a requirement that an applicant had to have owned the property for at least 2 years or something like that?
It was formerly 7, and now it's 2.
And that's carrying over to WRE?
Yes, WRE brought it down to 2.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. That's handy. A couple things on the ALE. Under the eligibility, it wasn't clear to me. You mentioned prime soils, you mentioned history. Is that a either or is that an and? You have to have prime soils, special soils, and some history, or it can be one or the other?
It's an or situation.
Or, okay.
The real focus and the most heavy emphasis is on that prime farmland, that there is some of that historic aspect to it, like I stated with the families, the Hoosier Homestead, exactly. I was trying to think of that name earlier. The Hoosier Homestead situation, that's a historic and in some situations even archaeological benefit that we can consider.
Okay, great. And one other thing on that, just on the funding, sort of a hypothetical, might flesh this out better. Say the easement appraises at $100,000. What if the landowner said, I would be willing to take only $50,000 for this easement? Would NRCS come in at 25 and the entity could come in at 25, or does it not work that way?
I will have to look into it further, but from what my understanding is no, it will not work that way, because that ends up being ultimately already right off the bat, a $50,000 donation on the part of the landowner, and this program doesn't really provide that option. So it really stuck with that appraised value.
So basically the entity is pretty much stuck with coming up with that, that full match, no matter what.
Yeah, again, the minimum or the maximum would be that 50% match, but then it could be down to the 50% of what NRCS contributes. So in that situation, $25,000, just $50,000. So that in that case, the landowner would be donating the $25,000 in a $100,000 easement situation.
Okay. Thanks.
Do you have a microphone, Mike?
I have to confess I forgot about that.
Okay, all right.
Out of the 8.
Brian, two things. One is, say we have the easement and NRCS takes 50% of it, the other 50%. Can two different entities work together to come up with that full 50%, like one to do then 25% and then 25%? Is that ever even something that an entity would even consider, that two could go together with their funds?
There is a way that you can do multiple contributions, but ultimately it's going to come down to whoever we have the cooperative agreement with is going to have to come up with that 50% match. So if you have a separate agreement, and you're going to have to prove that that money's there on the side, and that's something that sometimes has been a struggle. In other cases, an entity will go meet with a partner entity, as you said, to get that other part of it, their percent, but then that other partner entity never really materializes with that fund. It's going to have to be proven up front to NRCS that all that cash can be there at closing, because at closing, the landowner has to get 100%. There are situations where NRCS could make sure they get you their 50% up front as an advance for this, but there's no delay. It has to be that landowner gets paid 100% at the table, so you need to make sure any agreement you do with a partner, they've already transferred that cash to you.
And is the same thing set up like, say we had a land trust And again, the 50%, they would do 25, but the landowner is willing to pick up the cash of the other 25%. Does the entity work that out with the landowner?
I actually do not believe you can do it with a landowner. So the landowner, in the situation, they can do that sort of donation. So if it's the $100,000, again, you have NRCS at 50, the entity at 25, but the landowner's donation is that other 25. I don't think, as I read the regulations, and I will look it up again or consult with our national manager, that the landowner has any right to contribute any more cash to that. Again, it has to do with the donation clause of the program.
But they can donate money.
They can donate up to that 25%. Yeah.
Right.
They can donate equity.
Yeah, basically is what they're doing.
So they can't donate cash.
Correct.
Okay. That's where the difference is at. And then the other thing I'm trying to get my head around is, no matter what, whether it's the WRE or the ALE, the landowner continues to own the land.
Correct.
Under WRE, NRCS holds the deed and the easement.
The easement, not the deed.
Not the deed, because on that one side it said that U.S. held the deed.
Well, it's a warranty deed. It's tied to the property.
Okay, that was confusing when I saw that.
Yes.
So WRE is privately owned. NRCS holds the easement.
Mm-hmm.
The deed of the land is still the landowner.
Yes.
ALE is still privately owned. The landowner holds the deed to the land, but the entity holds the easement.
Correct.
Even though we put 50% into it.
Correct.
Right.
I remembered my
my God.
I remembered
You have your mic. Okay.
So let's say a landowner holds a parcel, and just for argument's sake, say it's a wooded parcel, and there happens to be a spot on that parcel that has a fabulous view. Can the landowner negotiate a 5-acre or so carve-out of, say, that 60 or 80-acre parcel, have the remaining part of the parcel go into some sort of restricted? So to your question, that drives down the value maybe of the stuff under an easement, but it may drive up the development value of that carved out parcel. Is that negotiable?
It would be, especially between the entity and the landowner. And we do that with WRE, so we occasionally get these properties that do have the astounding view, or they've got enough upland area that they want to put a hunting cabin. We're going to tell them up front, you need to consider that and get that cut out of the easement, because once it's in the easement, it's no-go. You can't do it. So that is something that needs to be discussed
on the front end,
because it's not ever going to be changed on the back end.
Okay. That brings up the question of what are the appraisal standards and due diligence standards for these easements?
We have got pages and pages of appraisal standards and specifications, and if you would like some lovely nighttime reading, they're all right for you. It is different for ALE than it is for WRP, and I truly haven't dived too much into it.
Under most federal programs, this example that we just talked about having the carve-out, because it had a great view, that actually goes to diminish the easement value more than the actual value of the easement, if that makes sense. It's a beneficial interest from the seller, and he's retaining the beneficial interest of the view at that particular location, and in the appraisal process, that would then diminish the value. It goes against the value of the easement for a compensatory purchase.
The way I understand that these have operated, there are specific U.S. standard appraisals that they're going to look at the before value of the easement area and the after value. Whether or not that carve-out has an impact, I really don't know, having not run one through. Now, I know we have some more online questions.
We do have one question from Nick. Nick, go ahead. Your line is open.
The raise hand thing actually worked. That's pretty good. I had a couple of theoretical kinds of questions about
my favorite.
Yeah, about a private entity owning the easements. There are quite a few long-standing, very well-regarded land trusts in Indiana. There are also some that pop up every once in a while and then kind of go away. What happens if the entity goes away that's holding the easement?
Yes, we have posed that question as well. It is a concern because we do want to make sure that these are protected forever. The way the deed ultimately reads is NRCS is the next in line. Am I correct, Carrie? It's vague, but we should be next in line for enforceability. We have not gotten this received a definitive. That's basically what they're saying. Yes. So, but we won't have that theoretically ever happen, right?
That's right. The other thing is I can imagine, some of the groups thinking about how they can utilize this and benefit their organization. And I could imagine a scenario that might happen more than once where the entity that owns the easement might become the owner of the land. I'm not sure what would happen with the easement then if all of the rights came back together or if NRCS actually would step in at that point as well.
No, I think, and we'd have to look into that. Doesn't happen very often. There may actually be some restrictions against that, so I'll look into it. But I think what you're going to have is that the ag land component still has to be maintained. So even if that entity purchases its own easement, it's going to have to follow its own easement guidelines, and it's going to have to let it be farmed or not be developed, kind of thing. So should they continue to rent the ground to a farm ground, that would be fine, but they're certainly not going to be able to put a nature center on it. They're not going to be able to put houses on it or anything like that.
Public dollars went into it, so there's a public interest.
It's a public interest, so we're not going to see that easement suddenly disappear because of that.
Okay, thanks.
And I do know that there are restrictions, so an entity cannot put an easement on land it already owns. But I have not seen anything specific to that entity purchasing the land down the line. In addition, the entity cannot put an ag land easement on ag land for any of its board members or immediate families of its board members as well. So that's something to keep in mind. But as far as once that easement's there, I don't think there are any restrictions. There are some options to do subdivision restrictions. So if you want to see, if you have a large farm that comes in, there are ways to put in the language of the deed that can't be subdivided more than X many times. That's, to make sure that the agricultural operation does remain viable. You don't want to see a family, as you keep going generation to generation, continue to divide that easement up. So there are ways to make sure that does not happen as well, but that's something the entity needs to describe.
So I'm trying to figure out, when we're talking about the landowner giving a donation of land, where's that land going?
It's a donation of value.
A donation of value, thank you.
So if it's, again, a $100,000 easement, we'll pay $50,000. Your entity could pay $25,000, so the landowner is essentially in a situation saying, I'm okay not getting that other $25,000. That's their donation.
Yeah.
Great. In the event, if we were looking at this through a land trust size, is there any restriction on the land trust placing additional restrictions over the property for their interest that they're acquiring?
Again, that would have to be tied in what we would be reviewing as the deed, but as far as future things going over top of the ALE agreement, it'd be very limited because that ALE is going to supersede everything else. Just like WRE does the same. So it really would behoove the entity to upfront develop a conservation plan with the landowner and have those expectations for what can happen on the land. If you want a conservation cropping system and you want it to stay in that way, so that put that in the deed upfront, so it's with the ALE.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, the conservation plan is an attachment to the ALE deed ultimately. Anything else? Anyone else online? Questions?
Yeah, this is John again. I have a quick question. I think it's pretty basic, and I already know the answer, but I'd rather, ask and confirm it than to go on my assumption. Hypothetical situation, land trust buys some land, we get some, Nick will be smiling here, get some funding from the state, and the state gets an easement on the land that says, hey, you can't develop it. I'm assuming once that happens, that property is not going to be eligible for WRE. You're not going to want to buy a WRE easement if there's an existing easement in place restricting development. Is that correct?
That is correct. Policy says that if there's an easement already or some other agreement already on the property that restricts that, we cannot put a WRE on it.
Okay.
The exception would be something like classified habitat because that's not necessarily permanent.
Sure. Great.
But if they have something in WRE or they would want, they could cut that out of the portion for the ALE easement, couldn't they?
Yeah, WRE would be separate. You wouldn't need.
They just cut that out of the acreage, and that would be completely out of the easement for the ALE.
Yeah.
If they wanted to help restore wetlands, and just keep it separate out of that easement, because actually it would be protected, under the WRE. But you can't have it under ALE and then try to put it into the WRE.
No.
So that's why you really need to talk to the landowner about what do you want to do long term with your land. What's your kids going to do with it when you're gone?
Forever is a long time, if you guys haven't figured that out yet.
Something else, I may be making this up and it's not true, but we can check on it. I was just thinking about the neat partnership we've got with DNR and how we've been doing the Healthy Rivers, that I wonder, there's another program that we have. It's called the Voluntary Public Access Program. I wonder if it would be such that, say we've got state property, whether it's for fish and wildlife purposes or nature preserve, and right next to it is private land that, say, DNR enters into an ALE. It's still privately owned. DNR has the easement over that now. Can then DNR apply for the voluntary public access and get dollars that could go to the private landowner to have public access to that private land? Because under the easement, it doesn't mean that that's open to the public.
Correct.
But say that they thought, it would be neat if we could just continue that trail and the private landowner likes that idea. I just wonder if under the easement, if DNR could apply, it's kind of like a grant kind of, that public, it provides dollars that it's like a fee that you give to the landowner to allow the public to come onto their land. That might be something that we could think about that would entice DNR, because we are trying to get public, open, trying to get public out on some of these lands. So, Nick and Tom, this might be a way that we could entice even some more of our partnering with some items. Just something to think about. I just have to think about that.
Public access program a term limited? Perpetuity?
No, it's actually a grant program, so that the state actually applies for the grant to then either work with the landowner to get money directly to them to allow voluntary public access through their hunting or hiking or quiet use, and then also can use some of that money to do wildlife habitat activities on that land. So it's pretty common out west. If you've been out to Kansas, they have their WEHAs, which are walk-in hunting areas, and it's a similar situation to that.
Since what period of time?
I think the DNR sets that up. The grant would, they apply it's through the federal grant system. You apply, you get the money, and then you would set up that essentially a rental agreement, I believe, on that. It's not a forever necessary.
Grants are awarded annually.
It'd be an annual thing.
And applications are coming up this fall.
But I don't know that that annual grant I don't think it applies just 1 year of rental. I think it could be
That's a cool thing to think about.
It's a great issue. I spend a lot of time out west, and it's the walk-in programs are very effective. We'd have to talk to Mark Ryder about their goals and objectives on hunting properties, basically. They probably see it mostly for pheasant properties up in Benton County and the areas if it was going to be incorporated into a program.
Are there any more questions online before we kind of switch gears?
I guess I just ask, is this particularly for our entities here today, is this something that you all would be interested in? Is this something that, how do we get the word out, to more people? You think this has some possibilities here in the state? How do we help people take advantage of it?
Well, I know from my perspective from Little River, which, restoring wetlands is our prime mission, and we haven't really extended out to protecting ag land. But, we have a conservation easement where the landowner, receives the tax benefit from the easement. A lot of our land trusts use that. But we don't pay any money out to get that to happen. This is a program where we're being asked to pay money out. And so we're going to have to play with that a little bit for our organization. But as an individual in Indiana, I'm really excited about the project.
The tricky thing is coming up with the map.
Yeah. And that's what's been a drawback forever.
We found it to be very difficult. Try and raise money from donors for in fact, AFTs can get it out of. They don't do conservation easements anymore. They try to promote that with local land trusts because it's such a challenge to audit. And we got one guy in Northampton, Massachusetts, auditing these easements that we accumulated in the early years of the organization, and our board just said, we're not going to do that anymore. So the cash component is, and out east, some states actually have an appropriation where they put money into leveraging the federal dollars to get right the match. The state departments of agriculture or DNRs.
Hey, Brianne, this is Nick. Did you say DNR can be the entity that owns the easements?
Yes, with the ALE, not with WRE, but the ALE, the state governments and local governments are eligible.
I do think we have money for match, and I can think of some instances right now that we could have interest in doing something like this, especially buffering some of our nature preserves. Jane, I think you mentioned that, nature preserves and state parks, but I hadn't thought about the public access opportunity. If we could pair those two things together, I could imagine a pretty robust kind of thing happening.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
And we'll look into, I don't imagine because they're paying for different rights, I don't think there'll be a conflict there, but we'll double check into whether or not you can use those.
Because, Nick, that fits in what the intent of HRI, and I know folks have been talking about up at the Kankakee doing some creative things up there that, if we could kind of pool these ideas together, I just think we could probably come up with, again, it's the cash up front, but boy, to get some private landowners, I bet you'd find landowners who are interested. And, add that voluntary public access. Some of that might be a nice little package for us to really do some outreach and get the word out that we could do through some PR things. Be good.
Yeah, definitely. And we know we can't buy it all, but this could be a good way to get public out on ground that we may never have had access to before.
Yeah, we've got lots of spots along the Wabash and some other areas that we really like to try to, kind of target some places that this might really fit well.
And we know there's interest out there, especially, I think, from the grassland standpoint, because we haven't had money for GRP for the last 2 years to enroll new properties, but we've had continuous applications come in. Now, those stopped with the new Farm Bill since it no longer exists, but we do know there's still continuous interest in that pasture land protection system, and our participants in that are always indicating they're grateful because it does help them keep that land in pasture. It helps with the family legacy. Has been a big proponent of that. So I think there is definitely interest in ag land easements out there. I just think it's going to take some creative efforts and brainstorming to figure out how we reach those people in the industry.
I think on that topic initially, something we could do with ISDA, we administer the Hoosier Homestead Program. So there's probably just some promotional opportunity. We're already dealing with those families that own land for 100 years, 150, 200, and extremely proud of it and wanting to keep it in the family.
Absolutely.
So I think if there's simple one-pager or something that we could just start that conversation, it's something easy for us to do.
And on that note, that's probably a lot of our land trusts are watershed-based or by county, so is there a way for me to learn where those homesteads are in, say, the Little River watershed? Is there a database online, or how would we?
Is that a FOIA-able database?
I would have to check to see if that is public data for you.
Okay.
I know right now it's not readily available. Have something in an aggregate form would just tell you how much in a county or a watershed without giving you thoughts on the map.
Okay.
So I can follow up.
Just going to have to drive around like a tillage transaction for the sign.
Yeah, but those are the homesteads. That's not necessarily the acreage.
Oh, yeah, no, it won't be the acreage, but it's the location. All right. Well, with that, we did want to provide an opportunity for Jill to speak on our RCPP program, which is our Regional Conservation Partnership Program. Since many of you are our partnering entities on other efforts, we just thought it was a good chance to also tie in that conservation option with this. So, over to Jill. Okay. Here, right? Where's the arrow? Okay. Great. So, yes, one of the ties in with what we've been talking about in the Regional Conservation Partnership Program is that this program can direct Farm Bill program dollars to specific areas. So if someone's interested in one of these easement programs and they really want to put together a project in a certain part of the state and a partner has certain goals in mind for that project, you can put together a proposal for that, apply for it through this Regional Conservation Partnership Program, and that would bring additional dollars to the state for that project above and beyond our normal allocation that we're going to be getting. That's kind of a tie-in. So some of you are familiar, I know, with our CPP, have heard me talk before, but I don't know that everyone has, so I'm going to give you some of the basic information. This is a new program in this new Farm Bill. It combines some past initiative work that we've done as an agency, but the goal is really to provide an opportunity to be innovative, to bring new partners to the table, and to have a new process for partner-driven work. So NRCS is not driving the bus on these projects. Partners are coming to the table, telling us how they want our Farm Bill dollars to be used, where, and with what focus. Okay. So the way that this works is, as I mentioned, there's a partner application process. So partners would be solicited annually to put proposals together, and we've already been through, we're kind of in the middle of the first cycle of that, where an application for program funding came out, partners put in pre-proposals that were scored, a portion of those folks were asked to come back and submit a full proposal. Those are due October 2nd. And will be reviewed, and folks will know if they're funded by November 17th. So the next step to that is entering into partnership agreements with people that are funded and then starting that work. The partnership agreement is the document that outlines the relationship between NRCS and the partner. But the program dollars that partners ask for example, EQIP dollars or ACEP dollars, Wetland Restoration Easement dollars,
Once those are awarded to the project area that the partners have outlined, the dollars then flow the way that they always have. Landowners would apply to the district conservationist at NRCS specifically for that pot of money, and they would have individual contracts with NRCS for either easements or for conservation work, similar to how our general programs run. It would just be under the umbrella of a special project, a special initiative. It combines the purposes of many initiatives, as I said, things like the Mississippi River Basin Initiative that fell under CCPI, Cooperative Conservation Partnership Initiative, things like the Agricultural Watershed Enhancement Program. Some of you may be familiar with some of this alphabet soup that we've had in the past. Now we have one RCPP program. It utilizes 4 program authorities, so partners can request funding through these 4 programs to target for a certain project. ACEP that we've been talking about today, both the wetlands component and the ag lands easement component are eligible. EQIP, Environmental Quality Incentive Program, CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program, and HFRP, another easement-type project, Healthy Forest Reserve Program. All of those can be applied for. So as I mentioned, it's a way to bring new partners to the table, bring innovative ideas to the table, partner in different ways. The idea of the program is really to leverage the federal dollar. So the agency is looking for partners to bring contributions to the table to essentially double our federal investment. So you can think of that as a 50-50 match if you want to. We don't use the word match with this program. You'll hear the word contribution. In the life of the Farm Bill, there's $1.2 billion available for this program. It breaks down to $100 million a year directly through RCPP funding, as well as 7% of those 4 covered programs I mentioned. So there are dollars coming out of those program pots of money that get pooled with the $100 million a year for RCPP. So over the 5 years, with the leveraging of dollars, we hope that the program will bring $2.4 billion to conservation. Mike, question?
Clarification. So the 7% in comes off at the national level. It doesn't come off out of your allocation.
Comes off at the national level. Yep. So states still receive their regular allocations, and any RCPP projects that get funded that affect the state is gravy. It's money on top of what we normally see. Okay, so that's the high-cut overview of the dollars. All of that money, the $100 million and the 7% skim, it's a good word, I like it, gets lumped together, and then it gets split back out into 3 different buckets. So partners can apply for one of 3 different types of proposal. Either a national proposal, and that's for multi-state projects, that's 40% of the money, or they can apply for a state-level project contained within one state, or they can apply for a critical conservation area, and that's 8 areas that were designated by the Secretary of Agriculture, and that's 35% of the money. I can show you what those 8 are. I have a list, and then I have a map. But the cool thing is Indiana is covered completely by 2 critical conservation areas, the Mississippi River Basin and the Great Lakes. So some states don't have that luxury, but we do, so our partners have 3 different ways, essentially, to apply for these funds. Here's the map that just shows that. You can see what areas of the country are covered. It covered a lot of the country, but not all of it. Eligible lands, this really leans on the eligibility of the 4 covered programs. So the lands are similar to the eligibility for those programs. Cropland, grassland, pasture land, non-industrial, private forest land, and then any land incidental to ag production, and we're talking about buffers, wetlands, things of that nature. The eligible partners, or in breed language entities for this program, are going to be, again, very similar to folks eligible to work with these covered programs. So ag and silvicultural producer associations, groups of producers that might come together, government at the state level, not at the federal level, but they can be a partner, just not a project sponsor. Tribes, farmer cooperatives, some of the new partners that we're looking for: water districts, irrigation districts, municipal water, wastewater treatment plants are eligible, and then nonprofit organizations and colleges and universities. So a lot of different types of partners that can come to the table to sponsor a proposal. I know. Some things that might get higher points or be scored higher in this program are projects that really deliver a high percentage of conservation. So we're looking for projects where the partner can really show that if you're asking for EQIP dollars, you know there are a lot of ag lands in this project area, you know that there are willing producers, or you can show how you can bring those folks to the table to participate in the program. You're going to have success there. You're significantly leveraging the funding, again, looking for that 50% contribution, either from that primary partner or other folks they're working with, that you can bring a lot to the table. Be that through promotion, through outreach, be that leveraging additional dollars to help pay for practices or pay for easements. A lot of creative ways to think about that contribution. And innovation, looking for different ways to do things, different ways to partner. And something new for our initiatives is this idea of helping producers meet or avoid regulation. That is something emphasized in the rules of this program and eligible to be considered. Some examples of things that might be covered, and I think most of you in the room are familiar with things like this, but water retention, air quality, habitat restoration improvement, erosion and sediment control, forest restoration, and easement acquisition and restoration, which is what we've been focusing on. Yes, question?
Is a pond water retention?
Well, I don't know. Do we have a standard for ponds? We do.
For what purpose? Controlling, say, sedimentation into a public water body.
One thing to think about, and this might be the best way to answer your question, is that all of these RCPP proposals really lean on the covered programs. So if you're asking for EQIP dollars and you can show that ponds is a practice that's going to help meet the goals of your project that you've laid out in your proposal, then by all means, that may be a practice included on the list that you're going to offer. But what RCPP does is allow you to kind of tailor your project. The long list of EQIP practices that are offered, maybe only 20 of them are going to be offered through your partner projects, because those are the only ones that really get at the goals you're trying to meet, and maybe pond is one of those. But the partner gets to lay that out. Does that help? Okay, good. I mentioned that there is a partnership agreement if you're funded. The partner and NRCS enter into a legal signed contract. It outlines that that project should be no more than 5 years. It defines the scope of the activities, who's responsible for what, describes geographic area, and the work that's going to be done. I think we covered this already, some things partners can be responsible for: contributing to cost of the project, outreach and education, working directly with landowners to help get the project work done, leveraging either financial or technical assistance, so either the dollars for practices or assistance in getting practices on the ground, technical assistance, and then conducting assessments of the project. And this is a really important one. And I think that projects that are ready and planning to do an assessment of their success, environmental success, social indicator type surveys, in addition to just what we usually see, how many acres have been enrolled, how many dollars, that's really proving to make projects more competitive. So being able to help NRCS tell the story of why this private lands conservation is doing good work and how it's doing good work. Okay, this is just an overview of some of the opportunities with RCPP, is to drive local innovation, harness creativity, accelerate conservation in areas where it may not be moving very quickly, launch bold ideas, and really show how voluntary private lands conservation can be effective. That's everything I've got, and here's my information. As I mentioned, we're right in the middle of the first round of solicitations, and the next round should be close on its heels. The first round combined the first 2 years of funding for this program, so it was essentially the fiscal year 14 and 15 solicitation all at once. So the next round will be called the fiscal year 16 solicitation, and my guess is we'll see it maybe around January. And the projects would start about a year from now. Any other questions from anyone? Jordan.
Question, if I misspeak, bring me in the right direction. I guess the State Tech Committee voted to utilize state EQIP funds if projects that applied for this weren't awarded. I'm right in saying that. Is that just affect projects that were applied towards that state pool?
Yes. So in Indiana, we saw 9 applications come in for the state pool. And because of the national level dollars available and because of the incredible demand that we saw across the country, all of the states were asked to please only ask 2 projects back to submit a full proposal. So now we're down to 2, and we know they're the top 2. They were head and shoulders above the rest. So now we're sitting here thinking, okay, there's still limited dollars. There's still 3 times the amount of what can be funded coming back in for full proposals for that state pool. Are our Indiana 2 proposals even going to get funded? Are we going to get 1? Are we going to get 2? Are we going to get none? We don't know. So that's what we posed to the State Technical Committee. We know these are strong projects. We've scored the pre-proposals. If with our state funding that we receive, we can't fully fund these 2, are you, our partners, open to us taking our EQIP dollars? And we know both these projects asked for dedicated EQIP dollars to help supplement and be able to fund them. And our partners said yes. And so that is something we're planning to consider.
So does that mean essentially those 2 projects are funded?
It may not, but it means that Jane has her partner's support to consider doing that.
But the decision about the state pools is not it's not her decision. There's somebody above.
The decision about the projects rests at the state level. The chief really wants the states to have control over the state pool. However, the dollars are limited. So the decision about how many dollars each state gets and what that division looks like rests with the chief. But we get to decide which projects we fund in the state. We evaluate the state proposals and rank and score them. So there's a little bit of a balancing act between available dollars and the good projects.
So if you were someone that wasn't in the top 2, and you were just below that somewhere, you can come back then in January in the next round.
Absolutely.
The strategy might be shrink the size of the project, reduce the amount of dollars that you're asking for.
Perhaps.
Does that
depends on the project.
Help the ranking?
I think the strategy is to make sure you're talking to us, first of all, so that we can help partners have very competitive projects. You know, it's very project specific.
And depending on what it is it just within the state boundary, or does it lap over into another state to where you might want to go for either the state pool or the regional pool, or the CAA? So you got to think about what the project is, and we can help kind of guide that.
So really, Indiana's in kind of a sweet spot because you got the Great Lakes, you got the Mississippi River, and you've got the state pool. So you know,
there's some strategy we're trying to figure out.
So she'll be able to maximize the amount of gravy that comes in.
And to make sure we're clear, even though we send 2 up, which we have, we sent our top 2 up, instead of headquarters saying Indiana's only so much money, only this one gets funded, they have said, okay, Indiana, we're not going to select them there, but we're going to give you X amount of dollars. With that amount of dollars, you said you've got 2. You can decide, do you go back and talk to the partner
and negotiate them into some sort of...
Do you say, okay, can you cut your project in half? Or we fund one, not the other. So that's why we kind of presented it to the State Technical Committee. But here in Indiana, all the partners along, we've said, we want our EQIP dollars to go into not done any lump CIG, any kind of thing with our EQIP money. Well, now we've got this opportunity, and it's a rigorous process to even be accepted into this. And the ones that we've got in Indiana are really neat projects. So that's why, Jordan, we went to the State Tech Committee and said, you know, if these two, we don't get the dollars to fund both of them, and if we got enough, but not quite enough, would you consider us peeling off part of our new EQIP fund and then support both of them? We don't know. But at least we got the support from the State Tech Committee saying, yeah, we would consider that.
So another question, and I think I asked this in a State Tech Committee meeting, and you were going to check on it, and I missed the next State Tech Committee meetings, how this shook out. But the 60% requirement for livestock, I shouldn't say requirement, the 60% goal for livestock projects under EQIP, does that apply also to the 7% skim?
I still don't know the answer to that question.
I would almost say no, that's completely separate.
I think the agency will make sure that we meet our 60% on the EQIP dollars that remain EQIP. And whether that's RCPP, EQIP, once the projects are awarded, or regular EQIP, that'll probably be looked at as a whole.
Because it's all one big part of EQIP money in headquarters. So it may be considered part of it.
And that's a national goal, too. So any one state may well exceed 60%, and another state may be under that. But as long as that national number comes out at 60, that's what the program requires. So that's going to affect the flexibility with RCPP.
Well, we have an RCP. Well, actually, we're partners on 2 projects in Illinois. And this question came up because a generation ago, every county had livestock, but things have changed. People got out of the business. It's consolidated into different kinds of farming. There are big expanses of Illinois that don't have a cow or a pig in it. So, you know, how can they compete?
It's not something that we're asking our RCPP applicants to worry about. It's not something that we're concerned enough about meeting that we're saying if you've got EQIP in a proposal, you've got to have 50% livestock in your proposal. As Bree said, it's being managed at a national level, and there's nothing in the RCPP guidance telling folks they need to worry about that.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. With that concludes our presentation. Before we end all of this, I just want to make sure that there's no more questions or any more discussion that anyone here or on the line has.
Is there any chance to get these slides electronically?
This was recorded, and I can also send you the slides. Is this Sean?
Yes.
I've got your email, so I can get those to you.
Thank you. It'd be a good reference.
Everybody wants them. We can do that. And like I said, for those of you know, there were other partners that maybe weren't able to make it. This was recorded, so we will put that file out there for other organizations who could not participate today. Well, with that, I thank all of you for coming, and for those of you that are on the line for calling in. You all, my business card is up here, and you saw my contact information on the presentation. Please feel free to call me at any time. And as was stated, you know, just with the RCPP and the ALE, just start coordinating with us right away, and that way we can all be on the same page as we move forward with any of these projects. So thank you all.